Hello and welcome to Comprehension Points Video Snark. If you came here because you thought that this was an audiobook, please stick around and maybe learn some reading and listening comprehension skills. I read books and discuss what went wrong and how they can possibly be fixed. Anyway, if you hadn't noticed, but yes, for the first time in the history of this channel, I am doing the sequel to a book. Since this book had yet to come out when I read the first book for the channel, I figured, why not? Why not read it on the channel? And here we are. That being said, since this is the second book in the series, feel free to go watch the other videos before jumping into this one. Those links will be posted below. A bit of a refresher for those who did watch the videos, but maybe it's been a while. The story takes place in a historical yet fictional background. Our protagonist, Hollis, lives at King Jameson's castle with her parents, where she has caught the eye of King Jameson himself. Hollis is abruptly thrust into a role of politics that she is woefully unprepared for when Jameson asks her to entertain a visiting royal, Queen Valentina, who was the second wife of King Quentin. He is the ruler over the neighboring country of Isolate, and the two countries are almost on the brink of war, if only because Quentin is a terrible king. Hollis finds unexpected allies and friends in a family who has recently migrated from Isolate, who helped her navigate the rocky waters of international politics with zero warning or training. However, friendship isn't the only thing she finds with the eldest Eastof's son, Silas. Despite nearly being betrothed to Jameson, Hollis finds herself increasingly unhappy with everything that he's asked her to do. She reaches her boiling point when Jameson says that he signed a peace treaty with King Quentin, promising their child to be married to Quentin's grandchild. Worth noting that both children are currently hypothetical at this point. Hollis realizes that Jameson only views her by means of how useful she can be to him politically, rather than wanting to be with her simply because he loves her. Hollis runs off with Silas, to the shock and horror of the entire court. The two of them get married, only to have the Eastof's past catch up with them. As people are celebrating the happy couple, assassins from Isolate storm into the new Easthoff estate and murder everybody, sparing only Hollis, her mother-in-law, and her sister-in-law. Hollis's parents were also in attendance and were also brutally slain. As an only child, she is left with their estate, but as Lady Easthoff and Scarlet leave to return to Isolate to reconnect with their extended family they left behind, Hollis makes a difficult decision to go with them. After all, she has literally nothing left for her now. Our story begins. Chapter 1. The story picks up immediately where we left off at the end of The Betrothed, with Hollis in the carriage with Lady Easthoff and Scarlet, and Eaton riding along on horseback outside. The narration takes a moment to go over how Hollis had jilted Jameson right before he would have proposed to her, and about the distant royal connection that the Easthoff and the Northoff family have to King Quentin, which is what got the Easthoff family slaughtered. Hollis also remarks over how dumb it is to kill off every last one of your distant relatives, especially when you're king. And worse is that Quentin's only child is so sick a stiff breeze could potentially kill him, which is to say nothing of Quentin's aging self. The carriage is stopped by soldiers, but Eaton seems to know one of them. Eaton explains how he's escorting his cousin and her surviving children back home, which earns them major sympathy points, but the soldier still has to check the carriage anyway. He greets Lady Easthoff, whom he seems to know personally, and expresses his deepest condolences. They introduce Hollis as being Silas's widow, which only earns her sympathy points as well. The soldier comments that the roads are usually crawling with Croatian soldiers, so they should consider themselves lucky to have been stopped by Isolatians instead. I don't keep up with much going on in Croatia, but it's impossible not to hear how your king has all but gone mad. Really, Eden. It's not as if he was that sane in the first place, the soldier laughed. Agreed, but apparently some girl rejected him, and he's been erratic ever since. Rumors are he's taken an ass to one of his best boats right there on the river where anyone could see. We've heard that he's got someone new, but isn't faithful to her in any sense of the word. Heard he set his castle on fire a few weeks ago, too. I know that this was kind of the first point in the first book, but honestly, the man is not mentally fit to be king, and Hollis was right to leave. The narration never shut up about how abusive and awful that Quentin was as a king, but Jameson is honestly half a step below him. The only rumor that might pain me, if true, was the thought of Jameson seeing other girls behind Delia Grace's back. I hated the idea of her thinking she'd finally gotten what she wanted and being so very wrong. The problem was that in the beginning of The Betrothed, when Hollis first caught Jameson's eye, she felt certain that it wouldn't last long because he tended to flit from girl to girl. He was a cad who only began to settle down once he was interested in Hollis, for no real reason other than the plot demanded it. But now that Hollis and the plot have moved on, it seems as though Jameson has returned to his cad ways. And it has been a while since I read The Betrothed, but I also seem to recall Delia having thrown Hollis under the bus simply to try and get Jameson for herself. So in all honesty, having Jameson cheating on Delia sounds like karma to me. Anyway, the soldier continues on and says that they're really on their guard recently because they don't know what Jameson might do. Lady Eastoff thanks him for his diligence and promises to pray for him. The carriage begins to move again, and they approach the border. Hollis looks out the window and sees a bunch of older soldiers standing there and worries for a second that one of them will recognize her, but nobody does, and they cross over without incident. However, Lady Eastoff and Scarlet both seem to think that there's going to be even more problems ahead. Chapter 2. They continue on into Isolate, and Hollis watches the scenery change around her. Around nightfall, they come to a manor house where Lady Eastoff seems to know the homeowner. Also, Lady Eastoff is finally given a forename of Whitley, which I think is more than Hollis's own parents ever got. Anyway, these people are the Northcotts and Ian's parents. Lady Giovanna Northcott greets Hollis warmly and with a massive amount of sympathy for her current situation. She then tells both girls that they can go out for the night before she disappears with Whitley. Eden is left to show his cousins to their room, although he seems annoyed by the entire thing, which is fair considering he's been babysitting them for a while now, and is honestly kind of rude for his mother not to personally show the new guests to their rooms. Hollis and Scarlet begin to put their things away in their 2 rooms, and they both have the door open to listen to the other working silently. After a while, Giovanna comes and gives Hollis some old clothes. Hollis agrees that she can rework them to fit her properly, and that it'll give her something to focus on. The 2 of them talk briefly about grief and how it doesn't really get any easier, which would be a nice moment if it didn't happen in the span of about 3 paragraphs. Everybody gathers in another room where there's better light to sew by. Giovanna begins to tell Hollis the story of Quentin and that she wouldn't have ever heard in Kuroa. Sure, Hollis knows the sweeping generalization that Quentin is a miserable king and leader, especially after having met the man and entertained his second wife. But this is the more nitty-gritty stuff that these people have lived through. If the king is truly awful, isn't there usually a revolt? Don't people just get angry and take the castle? Sweetie, you literally survived Quentin's countermeasures to make sure that no such thing ever happens. Or is the narration going to have to spell it out for you like you're that stupid? Apparently the narration shows Hollis is too stupid and doesn't even remember the slaughter that happened at her wedding reception. I remember Hollis being slow in the first book, but holy cow, I don't remember her being too stupid to function. They talk briefly about how they're going to deal with the tyrant king, but enough of that. Let's talk about how Ian is angry that Hollis is there. Clearly more important. But before that can go much further, Lord Northcott shows up and decides to actually drag the plot back before Hollis can chase it further away. Which, yay! Anyway, he talks about including Hollis in on these plans and talks about how they kept trying to bribe castle guards. Hollis tries to ask about Valentina, but nobody there views the new queen as anything but the wife of my enemy, which is 100% a mistake to overlook all and any allies. Having Valentina on their side would be invaluable. The readers and Hollis know that Valentina would probably do anything in order to get away from her miserable excuse of a husband. They mention how Quentin is insistent that Valentina is pregnant, but literally anybody with eyes can tell that she's not. Then they start talking about Quentin's only child, Hadrian. They mock his poor health, which is understandable considering his position and his father. They say that he's supposed to get married later this year, but that it would surprise literally anybody if he lived that long. Hollis tells him about the contract Jameson almost trapped their firstborn daughter into in order to marry Hadrian's oldest son. She says that she wasn't actually named in the contract and thinks that the weight of it could possibly be passed on to Delia, ignoring the fact that Delia and Jameson aren't even engaged and forget about being married. They find all this tidbit interesting that Quentin would barter for peace like that. They think that is good info to have, but aren't quite sure how to use it right then. Hollis then has a random flashback to when they'd been entertaining Quentin and Valentina in the Kuroa court, and Quentin had warned Hollis to stay away from the Eastoff family, except the Eastoff family knew that they were targets and told Hollis all about it. At this point, Hollis doesn't get to be upset about realizing the extent of what Quentin did. It's like she needs to have every little thing spelled out for her like she's 5. They talk about whispers of another attack that few have heard of. Eaton mentions how the king is silencing people, but the way he says it acts like he's never heard of Quentin doing such things before. Which, need I remind you that even in the first book, the Eastoff family literally outright told Hollis that this was going to happen. This shouldn't be a novel concept to isolate citizens. It should be par for the course in dealing with their tyrant king. Chapter 3. Hollis can't sleep. She thinks about the endless night sounds at Jameson's castle with all the servants moving around at all times. Now the night is silent, which forces her to think about the last moments of not only Silas but also her parents. Hollis gets out of bed and goes to Scarlet. Her newfound sister is jumpy and holds a knife when Hollis comes in, but quickly puts it away with an apology. The 2 of them had shared the bed on the journey over there and wish that they'd asked to share a room now. Hollis confesses that she's been turning over her encounters with Quentin since the discussion earlier that afternoon, but she can't think of anything that would be important and she feels kind of frustrated. "Do you know why we left Isolate?" Scarlet asks. "Considering that your king literally sent assassins over a political border to kill you, I have no idea why you left Isolate. Why don't you tell the readers?" Scarlet said that once Quentin was removed, they'd have to put somebody else on the throne, and that somebody was supposed to have been the eldest son from the Eastoff family, aka Silas. But now that he's gone, they have to throw their support behind Uncle Reed, whom I think is Eaton's father. Anyway, Scarlet goes on to say that the only solution is murder. Quentin obviously needs to die, and they're going to have to take care of Hadron. Not mention is how even the group of them had joked a few hours earlier about how Hadron likely wouldn't live to see the end of the year because of his poor health, but whatever. Hollis draws the line when Scarlet mentions that they're going to have to murder Valentina too. However, she doesn't explain why she keeps protesting over Valentina's role in Quentin's rule. Because, yes, I will go down swinging, because if there's one person who wants Quentin dead more than the Northcotts and Eastoffs, it's Valentina. But no, explaining is too hard, so Scarlet has to keep dunking on Valentina. Scarlet randomly changes the topic and asks Hollis if she thinks that she'll ever get remarried. Hollis says no, that Silas changed her too much for her to really think about that. She asks Scarlet if she wants to get married, but Scarlet says no. Too much has wounded her, and she's lost too many people, and she put up walls to protect herself from further hurt, which is completely understandable. The next morning, the girls joke that with Hollis's money, they could run off and become gypsies, reading tea leaves and dancing for corn. And I know that some people are probably going to protest over what they said as being a racist word, but I'm simply telling you what's in the book. If you have an issue, you need to take it up with Cass, not me. This book was published in 2021, by the way. Chapter 4. Later, Hollis tries and fails to do up the laces on the sleeves on her dress. No, I don't know what that means. As she waits for Scarlet to come and help her, she thinks about all the places she's lived at. She spent such a long time at Jameson's castle with Mace to help her. Then she was at the new Eastoff estate, and now she's in a new place. Eaton finds her and scolds her over having not sent for a maid instead of waiting around for Scarlet to come back. Hollis tells him that she did send for a maid, but one never came. She doesn't tell him that she also sent for water last night, and that never showed up either. Eaton gets in her face and demands to know why she didn't go crawling back to Jameson. And I get that Hollis doesn't owe Eaton any answers, especially not when he's being so rude and confrontational about it, but telling him how much of a piece of poop Jameson is would probably help the situation a lot. Scarlet comes in and Eaton is quick to leave. Hollis huffs over her encounter with Eaton, but Scarlet is quick to say that her cousin is passionate and can be quite nice once you get to know him. The two girls say that after this nasty regicide business is over, they want to move to the countryside as far from any of this as possible. They talk about becoming old maids together and raising a bunch of goats. They go down to breakfast, where a maid literally refuses to pour Hollis a drink despite having poured for Scarlet and Eaton. Hollis is more embarrassed that Eaton witnessed the entire thing rather than the actual act of being snubbed. Giovanna tells Hollis that she'll have to have a tour of the grounds. She then invites Hollis to call them Aunt Giovanna and Uncle Reed. Both the maid and Eaton are super angry over this, and I don't know why, especially when Giovanna says this. It's such a wonderful change. We're so used to losing people. My sweet nephews, my two girls. I swallowed hard at her words, realizing now just where her sorrow stemmed from. Finally, we've added someone. Thanks for listening to my book Snark on YouTube. New videos are up every Monday, but stick around because I sometimes drop random videos on other days too. Just as a reminder, even if you can't financially support me, there are other ways to help me out. The first is watching this video as well as all my other videos. It's also important to like and subscribe. Finally, you can share this video with all of your friends so that they can help as well. If you're already caught up with all of my videos, you can go to Tumblr for my main book Snarks, always free and updated every morning. And if you've already read all of my main Snarks, then you can find even more Snark on my Patreon. You can access it for $1 a month. Members also get early access to my main Tumblr Snark. Special thanks to Dawn, Phoebe, and Nikki for supporting me on Patreon already. If you want to hear your name in my video next week, you either support me on Patreon or make a one-time donation. Do you like my Snarks so much that you want me to snark your writing? I do that too. For just $6 per chapter, I will tell you how awful that your writing is. But not to worry if you feel like you couldn't take the criticism. I also offer regular book editing as well, just 1 cent per word. You can contact me on any of my social media platforms if you have further questions. If you want to read some of the things that I've written, you can purchase my works on Amazon. I have a slew of erotic short stories and 2 full-length novels. I also frequently run flash sales on my stories, and if you aren't following me on any social media, you might want to do so just so you can know when I might be offering things for free. Links for everything will be posted below. See you next week, guys!